You are listening to episode 23 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Our guest today, Dr. Patricia Jennings, speaks with us about her program, Care for Teachers, Cultivating Awareness and Resilience in Education. It seems we can't find anyone who's not pretty significantly stressed these days. Between work, family, and all the activities of daily life, we can often forget to take care of ourselves. This is especially so for those who spend their days tending to the needs and learning of others. Our guest today has developed programming to help with those undervalued professionals, our teachers. Dr. Patricia Jennings is the Senior Director of the Contemplative Teaching and Learning Initiative at the Garrison Institute and is Associate Professor at the Curry School of Education, University of Virginia. Dr. Jennings received her doctorate in Human Development from the University of California, Davis, and completed postdoctoral training at the Health Psychology program at the University of California, San Francisco. She led the CARE faculty team in the development of Garrison Institute's Cultivating Awareness and Resilience in Education, and she is conducting research to examine how CARE may improve student-teacher relationships, increased student pro-social behavior, and more positive classroom atmosphere and improved student academic performance. In addition to psychological research, Dr. Jennings has over 22 years of research and teaching experience in the field of education. And our guest today is Dr. Patricia Jennings. Tish, welcome to Present Moment.
Thank you, Ted. Nice to be here.
We're here to talk about the CARE program, but before we get into that, can you tell us a bit about your background with mindfulness in your own life and how that intersected with the teaching discipline?
Well, I was just realizing the other day that it's been over 40 years since I started practicing. I started practicing when I was 17, and it was in response to some personal trauma that I was looking for answers to some challenging life situations, and I happened to have a friend who introduced me to Zen Buddhism. And so I started taking a class in Zen Buddhism, and that was the beginning of my practice. So it was really looking for, I wouldn't say solutions, but looking for ways to deal with some pain that I was dealing with as a result of some personal trauma. So I started practicing long before I became a teacher. And as I started teaching and, started working with kids, I really could tell the difference between times that I was practicing regularly and times that I wasn't practicing regularly. In terms of how I related to my students, how I noticed teachable moments, how I was able to regulate my own emotions. I was really a better teacher when I was practicing, and it made a big difference. So then when I started teaching teachers, I started observing the same kinds of issues that I found myself experiencing with other teachers. But I didn't quite know how to teach it. I knew that my mindfulness was helping me, but I wasn't quite sure how to fit it into teacher education at that time. This is in the 80s. It wasn't really very popular at that time. People didn't know what it was. I was still sort of, I would say, a closet meditator. It wasn't something that I was going to go tell everybody I was doing. So I tried helping teachers in other ways, but it became really evident to me after a while that the emotions associated with teaching can really interfere. And most of the experience I got with this was during a time that I was teaching in Northern California, teaching teachers classroom management strategies, but I was also these were student teachers, but I was also supervising their practicum, their student teaching. So I was watching them implementing the activities and strategies I was teaching them. And it became really obvious that when they were upset, which often happens when kids are misbehaving or aren't doing what you want them to do, the strategies I was teaching them, they just couldn't employ them because their emotions were getting in the way. And it was really hard to give them feedback on that. What I found was that when we're upset, we often don't realize it. And especially when we feel sort of self-righteously upset, like when a student's doing something they're not supposed to do, it's really hard to explain to a teacher why the way they're responding to that situation is not useful. The other thing that I discovered is we all have patterns that we learn from our childhood about how to respond to situations with kids. Usually we imitate the responses and behaviors that our parents used on us. So we have what I call scripts that are these habitual emotional patterns. They're sort of a default. They just kick in. It's a result of this fight, flight, or freeze response. We just act on automatic pilot and say things and do things that we don't even know that we're doing. And later, often we regret what we said, we regret what we did, and we go, I don't know why I did that.
I'm sure no one on the podcast has ever said anything that they've ever regretted.
Around their kids or teachers said around the kids they've been teaching. When our buttons are pushed, that's what happens to us. And what I realized was that for myself, the mindfulness was helping me with that. The mindfulness was helping me see past that. It was helping me recognize. It gave me more self-awareness to notice when I was doing that. And it also helped me regulate myself when I was doing that. So I could stop, take a moment, and realize that I wasn't perceiving the situation accurately or that my perceptions were narrowed by my emotions. Anyway, at some point or another, I decided I wanted to go back to graduate school. My son had graduated from high school, and I decided it was time. So I went to UC Davis and got my doctorate, and I studied stress and coping, and because I was very curious about this problem, this stress problem that teachers were having. And I learned a lot about stress reactivity that made a lot of sense, and it helped me understand why teaching can be so stressful. What I discovered is that one of the primary situations that triggers cortisol reactivity, which is your body's response to that fight, flight, or freeze response. And cortisol is a hormone that helps your body engage in the kinds of survival mode things that will help it survive. For example, if you're being threatened by a lion, if your physical body is threatened, the stress response or the fight, flight, or freeze response will get your blood pressure going up. It will shoot blood into your extremities. It'll open up your lungs. And this is also, you can run really, really fast. It sends endorphins out into your system so that you don't feel as much pain. It does all kinds of amazing things to help your body survive. But most of the time, we're not really physically threatened. There's not a lion chasing us, but our body's still going through that same response. And if we don't really need that kind of physiological response because we don't have to run away, those chemicals and hormones in our bodies can be very toxic. The primary stressor that causes cortisol reactivity is something called social evaluative stress. This is stress that we feel when people aren't listening to us, when we feel like we're out of control, when we feel like people are judging us or making fun of us, or we're going to be criticized. That kind of stress is extremely toxic. And to add to that stress, which is, if you're in a classroom full of kids, they're not listening to you, they're not doing what you want to do, they may even be making fun of you. And any minute, your principal could walk in the door and observe all this, and you can't leave. It's a very provocative situation, and you have to self regulate in this context, and you have to be professional. Most of us in adult work settings, if something pushes our buttons, we can usually excuse ourselves and say, well, I need a coffee break. Excuse me, we can talk later. I need to go break. I'm going to take a walk around the block and then we'll discuss this further. In a classroom full of 25, 30 kids, you can't do that. You have to be there in that moment, be present for the situation and deal with it as it is. And when I discovered the underlying dimensions of this kind of stress, it made so much sense to me. And it actually amazed me that there aren't more teachers burning out than already are, because it's an incredibly stressful situation often. And situations where teachers are in very chaotic schools or chaotic environments, where students are coming to school without a lot of support. They may be coming from homes where they're exposed to trauma and violence. The teachers we're working with right now, which I will talk about in more detail later, are in the Bronx in New York City. They're in situations like this. So I wanted to find ways to help teachers like this, mainly not only because I want to help the teachers, but it's really hard for students to learn in classrooms like that. And so ultimately, my goal was to help teachers, but help them so they could be better teachers so that their students learn better. So ultimately, student learning and student behavior are the outcomes I'm most interested in. However, I'm also really care a lot about teachers and their well-being.
So Tish, do you sometimes have a challenge describing to teachers who are new to mindfulness that emotional resilience is not about numbing yourself or blunting your passion? Passion can be very helpful to them. It's how to regulate this appropriately moment to moment.
No, I think we do a pretty good job of explaining to them how important emotions are in their daily lives. And we do as much as we can to normalize the experience of emotion. And we use different techniques to help them tune in to how their bodies feel when they're experiencing particular emotions. And the whole range from what we would call comfortable or positive to uncomfortable and quote unquote negative. We help them tune into what the body feels like when you're experiencing that, so that it's no longer a secret. It doesn't surprise them. They can start noticing subtle changes in the tension in their shoulders, in their jaws, in their hands. And when you link the emotion with the adaptive function of that emotion, it makes a lot of sense. Like, for example, anger, the adaptive function of that is to fight. And so often when we're feeling angry, our shoulders creep up, our arms tighten, our fists tighten, because if we're going to fight, that's what we're going to do. We're going to probably hit somebody with our arms. We also grimace. We make faces that are kind of scary. and so we can get tension in our jaws and our foreheads from that kind of expression. And so if a teacher also you can start feeling very hot. Because the blood will rise to your head. And so feeling hot, feeling tension in the hands or the jaw, that is a signal that I'm starting to get angry, and that it's important to understand that feeling so that I can work with it. Because we're not saying that you shouldn't be angry at all. But when you're angry, there's more or less effective ways to express it and to deal with it. And one of the other things is anger can be very harmful and hurtful to others. And if you're not careful, you can say and do things that are hurtful. But expressing anger and expressing that something is not acceptable in a very firm way without hurting anyone, but just setting a limit, can be very, very effective. What's not effective is when you slip into wanting to hurt others. And when you're a teacher and you do that in a classroom, kids know that you're trying to hurt them. And all that does is set up power struggles, because students will often react to that kind of hostility with hostility back. And then it becomes a sort of an endless cycle of hostility, because the kids will get back at you, because they feel hurt and they'll want to get back at you. And the other thing is that when teachers aren't clear about what the boundaries are that are being broken, students often don't understand why the teacher's angry. And it's hard sometimes to communicate that, especially if a kid's not well prepared to understand the context of the classroom or what the expectations are. So on the other end of it too, we know that feeling happy, feeling joyful, feeling enthusiastic or curious, all those pleasant emotions stimulate learning and open our minds and promote the kinds of behaviors that we want to see in classrooms. So cultivating the pleasant emotions and being able to regulate the uncomfortable or challenging emotions. So it's really about what we call it navigating your emotional landscape and being able to work with it and learn some mastery over emotional experience rather than feeling like it's driving us, to do what we don't want to do.
So tell us about the CARE program. How did that get started, and what does CARE stand for?
CARE stands for Cultivating Awareness and Resilience in Education. And nowadays we call it Care for Teachers because the teachers love the fact that we call it that. Because in general, I think teachers feel very uncared for right now. They feel that the culture isn't paying attention to their needs. And I agree with that assessment. Right after I graduated, I got a position at UC San Francisco working on a project that came out of the meeting that His Holiness the Dalai Lama had with the Mind and Light Institute focused on destructive emotions. And Dan Goleman wrote the book Destructive Emotions based on that meeting. Paul Ekman was professor at UC San Francisco at the time, and he was at that meeting, and he became very interested in, along with some other scientists, in combining mindfulness and emotion skills training. And so he created this program along with Alan Wallace called Cultivating Emotional Balance. And they tested it with a sample of teachers. And when I found out about this study, I got very excited. And this was exactly what I wanted to do. And so I ended up working on this project for a couple years. I sat in on the Cultivating Emotional Balance project training, and I got a Varela Award grant to look at whether or not the changes we saw in the teachers, the reduction in the stress we found, would translate into improvements in their classroom. And this was a pilot study. It wasn't randomized. We were just comparing the two groups because this was after the fact. We looked at their classrooms. Did the control group training classroom look different than the experimental group training classroom? But we only used volunteers, so we didn't have the whole sample. And at the time, it looked like there might be, that the classrooms might be better among the treatment group. And that's what I got the Varela Award to look at. Later on, I did another study. I got another grant to look at the classroom more in the context of a randomized study. And we didn't find differences in the classroom. And I talked to Paul Ekman about this, and he said, well, in order to really help teachers deal with emotional stress, it probably needs to be more contextualized than what Cultivating Emotional Balance is doing. Cultivating Emotional Balance is a training that's not targeted for teachers, but teachers were the subjects that were used in that study. So I got together a group of two other people and myself, a team. I created a team to develop a new training that was more specifically tailored for teachers. So it combined mindfulness, it combined emotion skills, but all of the activities were focused on the particular challenges that teachers experience in the classroom. And so that became the CARE program. And we did this at the Garrison Institute because by that time, I had left UC San Francisco and I was working at the Garrison Institute as the director of the Initiative on Contemplative Teaching and Learning. And so my team was composed of Richard Brown, who's at Naropa University in the Department of Education there. He's actually created the Contemplative Education program. And Krista Turksma, who's been working in the field of social emotional learning for a long time. So we worked together and created that program. And we started testing it in 2007, piloting it. And then, refining it. And we, it took us a few years to get it like we wanted it. And we have had two federal grants to study the program since that time. One was to really refine it in the context of a school district which we did in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And then currently we're doing another large randomized control trial in New York City. In the New York study, we're looking at not only teacher outcomes, but also classroom and student outcomes. So this current study that we're doing right now will answer the question, if you improve teachers' well-being, if you improve their mindfulness, you help them with their emotion skills, and you improve their well-being, does that translate into a better classroom? And does that also translate into student performance, improved student performance and improved student behavior? So that's kind of where we're at right now. We do know that CARE does improve teacher well-being. We have that data. We found that in the study that we just recently published in School Psychology Quarterly. We improved teachers' mindfulness, their efficacy, and a lot of different measures of well-being. So we were happy about that. But the next step is, does this improve classrooms and student outcomes?
So tell us a little bit more about the CARE program itself and some of the things you do in addition to the studies.
Well, the first thing we do in CARE is we introduce the idea that self-care is important, and we do a self-care assessment with the teachers. And what they learn very quickly, or they notice really quickly from doing this, is that they're not doing a very good job of caring for themselves. And what they are doing is not very well balanced. When I say well balanced, I mean, we help them look at their physical, their emotional, their intellectual, and their spiritual self-nurturing. And they usually notice that there's something missing. And so that helps them realize, oh yeah, okay, I do need to take care of myself. I do need to focus some attention on things that will help me so that I can be the best teacher that I can. We use some metaphors that help them understand that if they're not taking care of themselves, they cannot be helping others. And then we introduce some really simple mindfulness exercises, breath awareness. We introduce body scan. We introduce loving kindness practice, but we call it caring practice. These are all secularized practices that we've developed, but they're based on the Buddhist activities. We also do set intention, and we teach them about the importance of intentionality in their daily lives. Another activity we teach them that they say they use all the time is just simply taking 3 deep breaths. They report that that is the activity that they do more frequently than anything. We do mindful walking. We do mindful eating. The program also has a whole series of didactic information or lectures about emotions, about why we have emotions in the classroom, how they affect our thinking, our students' learning. And then we also have activities where they're like guided practices that help teachers recognize and understand emotional experience better. And we do mindful listening activities. Finally, we do role-playing activities where the intention of the activity is to help the teacher maintain mindful awareness in the midst of an emotionally challenging situation. So we have them role-play situations that have been emotionally challenging for them in the past, and give them an opportunity to try out some of the skills that they've learned in the training in a safe environment, in a role play. And often they notice things about the situation that they didn't notice in the midst of the real situation. Here's an example of one of those. I was role playing for a teacher in one of these role plays once. She had a group of students gathered, and she was introducing something new that she thought that students should like and be interested in. And every time she would do that, this one student would give her a look and just go bleh, like that. But it wasn't, she didn't say anything. She just gave that look like, this is dumb. And the teacher would get very annoyed by that behavior and would, try to stop her from doing that, would chide her for it, etc. So when we role played it, that's what she told us happened often. So we role played it the first time. We usually do it twice. She did it the first time like she normally did. And then we role played it again. And she decided, well, this time I think I'm going to take a breath when she does that. And I'm going to see if I can just stay calm instead of getting so annoyed by this. or I can notice my annoyance and then maybe move beyond it. So she did that. And what I noticed as the kid playing the child was that when I did it the first time, I liked the attention I was getting from her by doing that. And the second time she did it, I felt like I was kind of left out. And I immediately wanted to be involved in the group. So I stopped doing it. Well, when you role play, you start noticing the dynamics, the social dynamics in those situations. The other thing she noticed that I thought was really interesting was that when she was a kid, she used to do the same thing to her mother, and she had forgotten about that, and that her mother would get furious with her. So this was an example of a script that she was bringing into the present moment with the student. And she reported later that she decided to try with the student to ignore this behavior. And it went away very quickly, that she had been reinforcing the behavior by paying so much attention to it. And she was paying attention to it because she had a script around it from her past. And when she started unpacking all that, teaching became a lot easier in that situation. It didn't bother her anymore, and the students stopped doing it.
And mindfulness practices help us notice things that are right under our noses that we're embedded in so deeply. It's just hard for us to see it.
It disentangles a lot of old patterns and habits that we may not even realize that are causing suffering for ourselves and others. And when we start to unravel that and start to notice that we're unconsciously acting in these ways, we can stop doing that. And that's one of the things we're finding with care that has, for me, been so rewarding. Teachers tell us all the time that little tiny changes that they're making, because they're bringing more awareness to what they're doing, have made huge effects in their classrooms. And I can tell you some of those stories if you'd like.
Yeah, what are some of those inspirational stories that have most moved you when you hear about them?
I'll tell you two. One relates to a high school teacher. She was a new teacher. She'd only been teaching 1 or 2 years. And when she came to our workshop, the care workshop, I could tell that she was one of these teachers that was on the edge of maybe not making it, because she had a demeanor that was very passive and kind of frightened. And I thought, oh boy, I could just imagine this teacher in high school not doing very well, or being easily victimized by high school students. And I found out that she was an English teacher, and new English teachers typically in high schools get the classes nobody else wants to teach, which usually is freshman English. And in this particular school, freshman English focused a lot on grammar. This was a private high school. So when she first came to the program, she did express that she had a lot of fear and anxiety around her students not doing what she wanted them to do, and that this was causing a lot of problems for her. When we came back for the second session after having not met with them for a couple weeks, we were asking them to share if they had any experiences that they would be willing to share. And she looked so different. She looked happy, excited. She was standing up straighter. She just looked like she had a lot more presence. And she immediately said, I want to share this great story. So this is what she told us. She said, I was prepared to teach a lesson on subjunctive clauses, which probably you couldn't find anything more boring and annoying for a high school student. And so she came to class with this plan to teach subjunctive clauses. She told her class, we're going to learn about subjunctive clauses. And they all completely rebelled against her. Her worst fears realized. They were moaning and groaning and telling her how stupid grammar was, how they hated it. They didn't want to do this. Why do they have to do this? The whole class was just being very obnoxious. And at first, she got very frightened. She found her heart beating hard. Her hands started getting clammy. All these sensations, she started noticing, the fear sensations. And she started breathing and realizing, okay, I'm all right. I'm not dying. I'm not being threatened. These are kids that are unhappy. I can deal with this. So she got grounded. She started breathing, feeling the present moment. And then things changed for her. She was able to shift her awareness. And instead of focusing on herself, she started looking out at the students and became very curious about why they felt so passionate about this. She said, wow, there was a lot of emotion in the room. It was very powerful. And so she started asking them questions like, well, why is it? What is it about this that you hate so much? What is it? Tell me more. And so they started talking about it. And so she engaged them in this conversation rather than fighting with them, trying to make them do something they didn't want to do. And so she had this bright idea and she said, okay, we're going to do something different. I want you to write a poem about why you hate English so much and why you hate grammar so much. But you have to be more articulate. You can't just say, I hate it. You have to say, you can't use the word hate. You have to come up with other words. And you have to use one subjunctive clause in your poem. And the students liked that idea. They sat down and got really busy. They wrote incredibly sarcastic, bitter poetry that was, all that emotion that they were expressing, they put into words. They didn't use the word hate, and they had to figure out how to put the subjunctive clause in. So after that, she felt like she could handle anything. She felt like, if I can handle this situation where these kids were in active rebellion, I can handle anything. She said her sense of mastery was just immediately turned around. And from that point on, she felt confident. A few months later, I was back at that school visiting and I saw her, and she came up to me and said, I have to thank you because I wasn't sure I was going to make it. And now I know I can. And it was just being able to notice these emotional experiences and be able to master them and bring mindful awareness into my teaching has made a huge difference. And so that's one story. Another one was with a younger student. This was one of our teachers in Harrisburg, and she had reported to us that there was one student in her class that was driving her crazy. This was a little girl. This was second grade. This was a little girl who was coming to school late every day. She would come into class. She would be really disruptive. She would interrupt what the teacher had already gotten underway. The teacher would get very annoyed and ask her to sit away from everybody else so that she could teach. When she did that, the child would get even more disruptive. And so there was this cycle of rejection and disruption that was going on in this classroom. After the care program, the teacher realized that she had never actually sat down with the student and asked her what was going on and why she was late. She also realized that she had a lot of scripts around being late, that being late in her mind and in her upbringing was something really bad. And being late pushed her buttons. And that maybe, being late wasn't that big of a deal, but maybe she should talk to the child. Well, she sat down with this little girl and found out this child was getting to school by herself without any adult supervision. Her mother worked graveyard and was asleep in the morning when she had to go to school. And this was a 7-year-old who was getting dressed, getting herself out of bed and, out and walked to school in inner city Harrisburg without any adult help. And when she realized this, she completely changed her orientation to this child. Her compassion and empathy for this child just, her heart opened up. And she thought, oh my goodness gracious, I've been judging this child. I've been angry at this child when, this child is doing the best that she can. When the child came in late, she welcomed her. She encouraged her to be part of the group instead of isolating her. She realized that the child was acting out because she was embarrassed. She was coming to school late. She didn't know what to do. And her silliness was just a result of being embarrassed. So when the teacher welcomed her and included her, she stopped feeling nervous and embarrassed and stopped acting silly and stopped interrupting the class, and everything improved. And this teacher said the one quote unquote problem child in her classroom was now doing really well. And in fact, she helped the child figure out ways to make it easier for her to get to school on time so that she did start coming earlier and earlier. And the whole climate of the classroom improved.
That's wonderful how she was able to think creatively in the moment when she had noticed her own attitude towards this with both stories, and was able to engage and understand more and encourage and inspire that change in the students?
Yeah, and I think it really has to do with being present in the moment because it's often we have ideas about how things are supposed to happen. Things are supposed, kids are not supposed to be late. Kids are not supposed to be in active rebellion in your classroom. Those are not supposed to happen, but they do happen. That's reality. And being able to be present for that reality and look it straight in the eye and deal with the situation creatively without all those scripts and biases. And I think often we try to make reality fit what we think it's supposed to be rather than being present for what it is and enjoying the richness of it for what it is. So I think that is what I see happening that's the change that I see happening.
So, Tish, the CARE program also has a CARE retreat. Tell us a bit about that.
The CARE retreat is held every year at the Garrison Institute, usually in August. And it's the same content, basically, but it's delivered over 5 full days in a retreat setting. Well, I have to say that sometimes we bring in some new content there because it is an opportunity for us to experiment with things that we might not ordinarily do, quote unquote, in the field, because the program that we do in the schools, it's limited by the context. Whereas at Garrison Institute, we can, we have more flexibility about what we can do there. So sometimes we go into, we might practice longer. We might go into greater depth in one activity or another. And people because they're staying there overnight, they form very close relationship. It's a wonderful opportunity to experience this training and these activities in a retreat setting. Usually we have about 40 to 50 people there. So it's a nice size. It's big enough to feel like a real retreat, but on the other hand, it's not so big that you lose intimacy.
You can find out more about the CARE program on their website, care4teachers.org, which we'll be linking on the episode page for today's episode. Our guest today has been Dr. Patricia Jennings. Tish, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
You're welcome. I enjoyed talking with you, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.